So again, if something is fun for you, but it's not for the mainstream media or the mainstream, population, you're going to hold back on sharing what's fun for you because you're just constantly worried that they're just going to reject you, right? So it's debilitating. You can't speak up. You can't share things about yourself. You don't want to take up too much space. You're constantly worried about what you're saying and doing, what people think about you. It's just, if I had to put it into a thing, it would be that you just don't feel safe walking around in your body. It's just this feeling that you're constantly overwhelmed by what you're going to say and do because it's going to be taken in a different way and misunderstood. So I would say that that's kind of my definition of social anxiety.
Hello, and welcome to episode 84 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform, leave a review, tell a friend, help get the word out there. Roxana Alexandru spent a decade working on her social anxiety. It was debilitating in all areas of her life. She now uses her experience to help socially anxious introverts be more comfortable around people and with themselves. All right. Well, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Roxana. Very excited to have you today.
Thank you so much, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So Roxana is also Honest Rocks on Instagram. That's how I became acquainted with you. You put out some great content, especially on social anxiety and introversion. And so we are going to get into all of that today.
Yes, my passion. It's funny to think that social anxiety is actually fun right now because I get to talk about it.
Yeah, it is funny. So before we do that, just tell us about your journey to understanding your introversion and your social anxiety to now helping people that are introverts with their social anxiety.
Right. So, I'm in my mid-30s. So I guess the story goes quite some time back in my early 20s. So I was working as an intern at a Fortune 500 company. I was around like 22 years old. And I took this test. And I think a lot of people can relate to this experience. It was one of those MBTI tests, that they want to figure out what kind of personality you have, what kind of communication style you prefer. And I found out that I was an introvert through this class. And it was I was distressed about it because they gave us these colors, right? So blue was more calm, more introverted, and red was at the bottom, which was very bold and confident. And I remember feeling very disappointed that I got blue because all the managers, all the people that were leading and that were in charge had red. So part of me was like, oh gosh, I'm just not going to be cut out to be a leader if I'm blue. I'm organized, I'm quiet, I'm detailed. I like to observe. And those were not qualities that I really liked about myself. I thought they were more like weaknesses, especially in a corporate environment. So that's how I found out that I was an introvert. And at the time, I was really disappointed because I was striving for more than that. I felt like it was holding me back. And then through time, I realized that it wasn't so much my introversion that was holding me back. It was my social anxiety. But before, I didn't know what the word social anxiety meant, but I had a severe case of it. And just to give you an example, I wasn't able to ask a question in a meeting room. That was terrifying for me. And I thought that was more like a part of my introversion, that I was quiet and wanted to be more in the back end of things. But the truth was, it was my social anxiety that was preventing me from doing that. So I really had to decouple my introversion from my social anxiety. And it really came to a head when one day my director came up to me. I had a meeting with him and he said that if I really wanted to be promoted, because I had started making my intentions known, he said that I needed to learn to speak up in meetings. And that totally just killed my confidence. And I don't think I'll ever forget that. It was one of those aha moments, like a big wake-up call, that I had this anxiety around speaking up or making myself known. And it had nothing to do with me wanting my quiet space. So that's when I really decided to take action and start working on my social anxiety. So that's kind of like the backstory as to how it all unfolded for me in corporate.
Yeah, thank you. And that's something that we will get into because introversion is a very natural way of being. So you're not going to ever overcome your introversion because
No,
you and I, we're introverts. We always will
for
be.
life.
There's some beautiful things about it if you understand it. But the social anxiety, you can overcome it with
Right.
some understanding, and we're going to get into that. So let's see, where should we start first? I definitely benefited from the Myers-Briggs, and I've done some colors. I was green,
Okay.
and you can be envious. Like you said, you're red. I've seen orange. Why can't I be red or orange?
Right.
And the green is kind of more analytical. And it's a strength of mine. And that's what you have to figure out. So I think that's just a very important part. And so when did you actually embrace your introversion? When did you say this is a good thing?
Man, it took maybe a decade. I'll be honest with you. Even to this day, that's still something that I have to really remind myself that it's a power, that it's an advantage for me. Because my husband is an extrovert, my best friend is an extrovert. I surround myself with extroverts, and those are always kind of like qualities that I strive to have. But whenever I do try to be more like them, I realize that it's kind of unbearable, just the amount of energy that I need to keep up with them. But it's still kind of in the back of my mind, like I want to be more outgoing. I want to be able to strike up a conversation with anybody on the street. I want to be able to not be so picky with my, the people that I choose to be friends with. It just feels like life is much easier as an extrovert. But I have learned to really appreciate myself more. And I think it was a journey to kind of, like I said, to separate from the social anxiety, because the social anxiety kept screaming that I wasn't good enough, that I was just never going to be promoted, that I was too boring, that I couldn't do this and that. My introversion doesn't say that to me. My introversion right now, it allows me to really put a place. How do I explain this? I'm finding out ways to honor myself, right? So if I really don't want to do something, I take a look inside and like, okay, I don't want to do this because it just doesn't make me happy, right? It's not because social anxiety is in the way. And that's different, right? If you don't do something because you're scared of what other people are going to think about you, that's social anxiety. But if you don't want to do something because, well, I just don't want to go outside. I want to sit down at home and read a book. That's really finding fulfillment in your own in your personality. And I think it takes a while, especially for introverts that have experienced social anxiety, to be able to be comfortable with themselves as they are.
Yeah. And that's a big piece that you just hit on right there. It's like, what do you like? And it's okay. You might like something that somebody else doesn't, and that's fine. That doesn't make your like any less valid. But at
Absolutely.
the same time, you may do some things with your extroverted husband that you just got to work all that out. You got to figure out, okay, I'm going to do this because, I want to spend time with him. This is something he's into. But at the end of the day, you have to, what do I like? This is very normal, the thing that I want to do. And, we do need to work through that in our relationships sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. And I think with accepting your introversion, you're able to place boundaries on it, right? So if I really don't want to go out to dinner with some friends and my husband wants to, I'm just going to really put a line and say, I just don't have the energy or the space for that right now, but you can go. Social anxiety doesn't allow me to do that. For me, social anxiety would have just said, okay, I'm just going to go just to make sure that I show up and I please people and I'm there, but it's not honoring myself. And I think being an introvert, you need to really figure out, like you said, that it's okay to just not do things because other people are doing them.
Yeah, for sure. So what would you say is a strength of yours as an introvert?
My superpower.
Yeah, your superpower. I like calling it that too. Yeah, absolutely.
So honestly, the one-on-one connection, and that can really flow into all areas of life. So like when I worked in corporate, I really made that my strength, just because, like I mentioned, I couldn't speak in meetings. I couldn't lead. I couldn't really be a manager. but I had to make myself known in a way in order to get promoted and, obviously to negotiate my salary. So the way that I did that was to really create and build strong relationships with not just my manager, but my manager's manager and their manager. So I was going up the hierarchy, and I was just going into their offices and having quick chats with them, sometimes lunches or coffee dates, just because that was the way that I could communicate better and that I could have myself understood, what my goals were, the projects that I was working on, because otherwise they never would have found out about me. So it's with that one-on-one connection that I was able to really make strides in my career. So I would say that that's really an introvert superpower, I think, for most of us. The other one that I really realized and I held on to was my observational skills. So I think introverts, because we're kind of laid back and we sit and we stare and observe people, we're really good at doing that. We catch on to things that most people might miss. And I remember using this power a lot when I worked in corporates. It was a way to make up for my lack of speaking up. So I would really pay close attention to key stakeholders in meetings, and I would see how they reacted to the conversation or whatever was unfolding at the time. And I would make mental notes about it. And then I would just separately approach them on my one-on-one strength and discuss the events that unfolded. And then I would bring up something that I noticed, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, how did you know that? Or how did you think about that? But it was because I observed so well that I was able to pick up on things. So I think those are my introvert superpowers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something. We're going to get into myths a little bit here, but
yes.
A myth is that we don't like people, but that's absolutely not true. It's just we might want or prefer or even have our superpower being connecting in a one-on-one or a small group. Mm-hmm. If we learn about ourselves, we can thrive in the big setting, but our preference may be the one-on-one, like you're saying. And I've really learned that about myself. And it can be a talent. Not all introverts are the same. Some people might really have a gift of seeing that person and being able to connect.
Yes, I think I recently read about more like the empaths and the intuitives. And obviously, I was so proud that I was more of an empath because I could pick up on people's emotions. But there's a lot of heaviness that comes from being that person that really picks up on everyone's energy. And it has a lot to do with like childhood trauma and really other things that have happened. But I would say that if you are an empath, then those are kind of like the observational skills that I just talked about. Those are things that you will pick up on. And again, not all introverts have that because it does come again with a loaded history. But if you are an empath, that is I believe that's a huge superpower these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I am intuitive and I'm always thinking. So I do pick up on things and my mind is always going. I'm not an empath. Again, we're all created differently for some reason. So if I'm trying to have empathy, it's going to be more a mental process for me. I'm going to try to imagine what it's like to be in your shoes versus where you're actually feeling other people's emotions. And again,
I can literally start crying in a meeting if I see someone that's struggling. It can really go deep. Yeah,
absolutely.
Interesting.
So we've talked a little bit about myths. And that's what this show's about. It's the strengths, needs of introverts and strategies for success, but also we do a little myth busting. So we did one that we do like people. Is there another myth or two that you want to bust today?
I would say, so this one really hits close to my heart. And I would say that it's that we're boring. And I've heard this message a lot, and sometimes I read it, especially the memes that circle around that just have us kind of like secluded in a cave or just not paying attention to anybody, and that we don't do anything fun, that we just stay home. That is not the case. And it sucks though, because if you get these messages, especially at a young age, and you start internalizing them, you're going to start feeling that pressure that you just have to do things that other people do and accept people's definition of fun when it's not yours, because you just don't want to appear as that you're boring. And it's so far from the truth, because if you think about it, like introverts, like we talked about, we just have such an amazing world inside of us. We're full of stories, observations. We have tangents that we run on. We talk to ourselves. There's always something happening. It's just that it's hard to express this inner world to the outer one, right? So we're not that great at expressing or storytelling. And we just stand back and absorb things, but it doesn't make us boring. And it's just, you need to be able to accept that your definition of fun as an introvert is very different than the mainstream definition of fun. But I think that's a really big myth that we need to start talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, well put. And it's not boring in our minds. That's for sure.
No, I am never bored, ever. No. No. That's so interesting. And I think the other one is that we have nothing to say. Whenever we're told that we're too quiet, speak up. It's not that we don't have anything to say, because I think there's a lot of times we do have a lot of things to say. But it has to be in the right setting with the right person. If you see an introvert talking to their closest friend, they're literally talking their head off. So it's not a case of not having anything to say. We just don't enjoy mindless conversation that leads to nowhere. And when I'm on these forums and these group chats and I talk to introverts, they always talk about how horribly painful small talk is and how they wish they could just do away with it. And that's just because we want to make sure our words have an impact. We just want to make sure that we're actually going somewhere with the conversation. We don't just say things to say them. So I would say that's another myth, that we have nothing to say.
Yeah. And I'll say that because we're introverts, we have a lot to say because we're always thinking. But It's just, we think and then we speak. And so we say what's most important. And, I'm never putting down extroverts when I'm talking about extroverts. I'm not putting them down, but they basically speak in order to think. And so they're saying they're sharing most everything. And we're sharing what we think is most important. And also, like you said, you made a really good point. We want to go deep. The small talk, it's not interesting to us because we're thinking of deep things and that's what we want to talk about. And like you said, if you get us talking about deep things that we're interested in, you may not be able to stop us from talking.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, if you listen to the podcasts, even, all the podcasts that are kind of geared towards the introverts, they run hours, an hour long. So there is stuff to talk about.
Yeah, and I'm really enjoying this conversation right here. So
awesome. I am as well.
All right. So let's get into social anxiety. First, what is it? What is social anxiety?
So if I have to put it like in my own terms, it's really the fear of being yourself around others. You just constantly worry that people are just not going to like you for who you are. So again, if something is fun for you, but it's not for the mainstream media or the mainstream, population, you're going to hold back on sharing what's fun for you because you're just constantly worried that they're just going to reject you, right? So it's debilitating. You can't speak up. You can't share things about yourself. You don't want to take up too much space. You're constantly worried about what you're saying and doing, what people think about you. It's just, if I had to put it into a thing, it would be that you just don't feel safe walking around in your body. It's just this feeling that you're constantly overwhelmed by what you're going to say and do because it's going to be taken in a different way and misunderstood. So I would say that that's kind of my definition of social anxiety.
Yeah, you're definitely worried about what other people are thinking, fearing being
constantly.
Judged. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and you just can't make any move without thinking about someone else's perception of it.
And how did you overcome that yourself?
So in terms of overcoming social anxiety, I think I've been trying to change my language around it and say that I'm learning to manage it.
Okay.
And I think because it's rooted so deep, I think for a lot of us, it comes from childhood, teenage years, and it really goes deep. The best we can do is really manage it. So for me, I still have social anxiety, I'm not going to lie, and I have it in a severe way in one particular area. So I don't have it anymore at work. I don't have it anywhere with my personal relationships. I don't mind if I embarrass myself, I'm awkward, I walk on the street in my underwear. That does nothing for me anymore. The one area where I struggle with it severely is with my kids, and that comes from my background. So if my kid is for example, uses foul language in the middle of the street, or gets super angry, or hits, or has this behavior that's not socially accepted, I have such severe anxiety that I either try to remove myself from the situation or remove them. So that's something that I'm currently working on. So I'm still not able to manage my social anxiety in that setting. And I don't think I'll ever be able to say that I've overcome it. I think it's always going to come up in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So how'd you learn to manage it?
Yeah, so it's really a combination of exposure therapy, which I think we're going to talk about in a little bit. Getting older, so I'm in my mid-30s, and I think as we get older, you just stop giving a crap.
Yeah, that helps for sure.
Yeah. Experiencing, like I said, a lot of awkward, embarrassing moments, and seeing that I'm safe, I made it through, nothing happened to me. And then mindset shifts, I think, made a big difference in my life. And of course, journaling. I think reflecting on my experiences and understanding the root cause of my feelings really helped me move through the process.
So what is exposure therapy?
Yeah, so exposure therapy, there are two types of it, but the one that's mostly related to social anxiety and what they practice in therapy sessions is progressive exposure therapy. And it's, like I mentioned, if you do avoid social anxiety, then you're giving it power. So social exposure therapy is really putting your social anxiety into the light. I guess you're just exposing it because it doesn't like that. So I like to give the example that it's like social anxiety is standing in front of you, and it's like a bully, right? So if you don't stand up to it and you hide, it's going to try to keep showing up. It's going to try to find your weak spots. It thrives off of that. But if you expose it and you stand up to it, you're going to weaken it. So exposure therapy in itself is really just finding the things that you're scared to do and doing micro steps to reach the bigger goal. So if I use my example of when I wasn't able to ask a question in a meeting, that's like the big goal. The big goal is I want to be able to ask a question in a meeting without feeling judged. Well, the first step is, okay, maybe I can start raising my hand because I don't like to interrupt people. I'm terrified of everyone just staring at me. But if I raise my hand and I just get the attention of one person, then that's easier to manage. The next step would be, for example, writing down the question so that I read it, so I don't feel like I need to come up with the words on the spot, which gives me severe anxiety. So exposure therapy is really finding small steps that leads to a bigger picture and exposing yourself that way.
In that process, I mean, isn't there a lot of changing your thoughts because you expose yourself to something and you're telling yourself, hey, this isn't so bad. Is that how it works?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you can manage one small step, then there's no reason why you can't manage the next one. And it's okay to stay at that first step for a while, for however long you need to feel like you've overcome it. You don't need to do step 1, 2, 3 within the span of a week. That's why it's important to understand that you are intentional with what exposure you're doing. It's not about just throwing yourself out and do like a public speech. That is going to do nothing for you. That's more like flooding yourself with the anxiety. So you need to make sure that it's an intentional step, it's tied to your goal, and that you're able to do it, that it's not too far ahead away from your comfort zone.
Okay. So it's gradual.
Yes, absolutely. Incremental steps. Yeah.
Okay. And then how do we change our thoughts?
Ooh, yes. I think everyone wants to know that there's no magic formula to that.
Oh, come on. You're supposed to give us a magic formula.
I will give you this. I will give you that you have to change the narrative. So reframing the situation has always worked for me. So if you're constantly worried about making a mistake or embarrassing yourself and you want to avoid that at all costs, you're probably going to stay home. That's just the normal reaction. And that's like the pattern that you fall into. But you need to change the narrative and change the perspective. And that's how you start changing your mind. So instead of staying home, you're going to say, okay, I can handle any social situation. I'll probably make a mistake and I'm going to expect that I embarrass myself. Maybe I'm going to mispronounce someone's name, but it's okay. I'll live through it just like I have in the past. So that changes your mind about how you're going to approach a situation, because instead of avoiding it, you're going to go the opposite way. You're going to show up, you're going to face it, but you're going to have the support of your mind saying, it's okay, I can handle it because I have done that in the past. So I think that's what has helped me change my mind, just thinking in opposites.
Yeah. And when you're saying that, I'm thinking that, I've had those kinds of thoughts. And like for me, I've definitely struggled with perfectionism that contributes to this social anxiety. But one of the ways I reframed, like you're saying, is, hey, you know what? Nobody's perfect. You're not the only one. And
Right.
we're all going to have awkward moments, and it's okay. I mean, I think understanding yourself and your introversion, you can have less awkwardness. Just understanding you're gonna have some, and that everybody does. We all do, and
Absolutely.
not thinking you're the only one. I think that's really helped me.
It does. And another thing that people do need to realize is that even if you feel awkward, chances are that no one else can see that. No, unless again, like they're an empath and they can read minds or whatever, they're not going to know that you're having an awkward moment or that you said something that you didn't want to say. It's all in your mind.
Yeah. And that's another thing too. We definitely are worried, or the most worried about us, and everybody is the same. Everybody is more worried about themselves. And if you do have an awkward moment, you're the one most worried about it, and other people are worried about their own awkward moments. So that's an important thing to remember.
I mean, just picture two people, standing, having a conversation, and each one is having an awkward moment. They're going to think about their moment, not what you said, right?
Right. And we forget that. We think that everybody is so worried about this thing that we did, and it's really usually not the case.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to dig deeper into that, make sure that you Google the spotlight effect, because that's one of the cognitive biases that leads to that.
Yeah, that sounds good. So Roxana, how do you help introverts overcome their social anxiety?
So in different ways. So obviously the exposure therapy is a big one. So I run this social anxiety challenge. I think every couple months I run it. So I really want to make sure that people are in tune with their social anxiety and that they continue to test it. Because if you go like a long period of time without testing your social anxiety, it's going to be more intense. And I think many of us have experienced that post-pandemic. After like a year of no interactions, I remember coming out and I couldn't even do eye contact with my closest friends. And that's when I knew that my social anxiety had come back, like roaring back. So doing like little things on a daily basis helps. So I do this challenge to remind people that they should constantly expose themselves to that. But I mostly help introverts overcome it or manage it by getting in touch with it. So I do that with my reels. So really creating awareness, because like I mentioned, a lot of us don't know we have social anxiety and we don't know how much it affects us, in lost time and even financial resources. And we might be missing out on so many opportunities because of our social anxiety. So I want to make sure that I bring awareness to introverts that have social anxiety so that they can actually start working on that. Another way that I do it is by wearing this red wig. I don't know if you've seen any of my reels, but
I have seen it. Yes.
So that's kind of like my alter persona. I call her Veronica. Someone named her Veronica. So I'm just going to run with that.
Okay.
But I want to make sure that I send the message out that you have to detach yourself from your social anxiety. So you stop believing that you're the problem. Because I find like a lot of people think that they're just stuck with social anxiety. It's just who they are. But I want to make sure that introverts know that it's an experience that you're having. And just like any other experience, you can just not have it, So if you use the words, I'm socially anxious, then you're identifying yourself with it, which makes it harder to separate objectively. So I want to make sure that, again, awareness, exposure, and mind shift. I think that's how I like to think that I help people.
Yeah. And I think that the pandemic did set people back. Maybe they were learning to manage it, and then all of a sudden they're not being social. And I think that was definitely a thing. It was strange for me when we weren't going out much, maybe just to the store and wearing a mask and not being able to smile at people. And I think that set a lot of people back that are trying to manage it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So how do people get involved with your challenges?
Yeah, it's I have it on my Instagram bio and on my website, the Social Anxiety Challenge. I actually have a whole workbook of 35 tasks that you can do at any time. So, and different levels for each one. So you can buy that. It's like $20 on my website, and you can just constantly refer to it if you're running out of ideas on how to test your social anxiety. So, yeah.
So introverts or extroverts, either one can have social anxiety.
Yeah.
You think it's different for extroverts?
So I think social anxiety is more intense for extroverts. For introverts, we can just hide at home and we're happy about it. It's not a problem for us to be stuck at home and watching Netflix or reading a book or drawing or whatever. Even though, like I mentioned, avoiding social anxiety is not the solution, but if we do it, we're in a happy place. For extroverts, it's not the same experience. They need that hit of dopamine from their social circle. So they physically actually need the interaction, but social anxiety is getting in the way. So it's definitely more pronounced for them. Like imagine you really want to be able to be part of a group. You want to have fun. You want to interact because you actually need that to be fulfilled, but you can't do it because of social anxiety. So that's not the case for introverts. So that's why I feel like I haven't talked to many extroverts with social anxiety. I think that's pretty rare. But for those that do have it, I think it's much more difficult to handle.
Yeah. Sometimes I think people think it's just introverts that have it. I think we might be a little more prone to it because we're turned inward. So right. we think more and we may be more concerned. But I agree. I think it can be worse for extroverts, but either introverts or extroverts can be socially anxious, and they can also learn to manage it too.
Absolutely. I think I had a friend who struggled with social anxiety, and she thought she was an introvert because of that. But I think the struggle for her was that she really wanted to go out and be with her friends, and she didn't understand why she was having such a hard time with it. And then she figured out that it was social anxiety and that she was not an introvert. I don't know. It can really play with your mind.
For sure. So how do you think introverts can gain confidence?
Practice. And I could just leave it at that. But I have this blog post that I say that practice makes confidence. And I really believe that. So, confidence comes from practice. It's just like a muscle. When you go to the gym to lift weights, you just have to practice being confident. And, some people might have more confidence depending on their upbringing, personality type or experiences that they've had. But I think if you start super small and do like micro accomplishments, like that, I was able to raise my hand in a meeting. That is a little micro accomplishment that's going to give me a boost in confidence. So building up every single day gets you to the point where it doesn't become a struggle anymore, and you just feel confident doing that particular action.
Yeah. So practice, and then, like you said earlier, along with that practice, reframing your story and your thoughts about who you are and your strengths, and that can really go a long way. Mm-hmm. So how'd you go from socially anxious to being able to make videos on Instagram and YouTube?
Again, practice.
Okay.
No, but honestly, courage. I think that's an often overlooked one. I think you do need to find courage inside sometimes to just go for it, just do it, without even thinking, like blindly do things. I just feel like I had this urge for so many years to let my inner world out. So maybe because I didn't speak up, I kept everything inside. At some point, the pull was just so strong that I felt that I needed people to know what I was thinking. So I just started putting out blog posts, and then obviously opened my social media accounts. And it was just like a progression from there. I started doing stories and then videos on YouTube and then reels. So again, it was a progression. I didn't just go straight into doing YouTube. I started sharing my thoughts in different ways. And I felt comfortable doing that until it just became this natural step that video would be part of my life. And now I absolutely love it. I'm obsessed with video, and I would be on camera all day long if I could.
All right. Yeah. And we do have a lot to say, and I'm so glad that you're sharing your thoughts with everyone. But there's ways that we can learn to do that as introverts, and ways that we can learn to make it effective. You also did an online summit this past summer that I really enjoyed, and you had some introvert experts that you interviewed, and you did a great job at interviewing them. There was the Grow Introvert Grow Summit. How did that come about?
That was a spur of the moment. How do I say? The muse just appeared in the bathroom one day and was like, I just thought of this title, Grow, Introvert, Grow. And I didn't know what to do with it, but I thought it was so catchy that I just bought the domain on that day. I just walked out of the bathroom and bought the domain. And then I just realized that I wanted so much to talk about introversion separate from social anxiety, and I had to give it a place. So I created Grow, Introvert, Grow to give space to all the other ideas and thoughts that I had on introverts outside of social anxiety. And then I just thought, okay, what is the best way to start exposing this website? And obviously it's through, the community, people talking about it. So I reached out to some friends in the community and asked them if they wanted to speak at a summit. And then it just started flowing and I got 12 speakers. And it was within the span of 4 weeks that the whole thing just from beginning to end, it was the worst time of my life. It was between scheduling, creating the website, doing the videos. It was so intense. But it was the most fulfilling experience I've ever had. So I'm glad I went through it. And I think the feedback that I got really inspired me to keep going.
Yeah, great job on it. What did you learn most from it?
I think I treated each session as a personal coaching call. So I learned from each speaker. I asked the questions that I felt were the most relevant for my life so that I could implement those insights. So I think each one was like a huge coaching session that I got something out of. And obviously learning about myself in a way that I'm able to ask the right questions at the right time. I didn't know I had that skill. So I'm going to put that into my, introvert superpower, asking the right questions.
Yeah, it is absolutely a skill that you can have and you do. So that's great. And, people would think, an introvert, they can't do that. They can't be on a podcast. They can't host a podcast or an online summit, but you just got to know how it works for you. How it's not for me, when it comes to introverts, it's not if an introvert can do something, but it's how can they do it? How can they do it best? And that's something that you got to learn how to do.
Yeah. And I wanted to highlight that from all the introverted experts in their particular field, because, you have like brand strategy, you have career growth, you have social media, and there are introverted ways to approach each one of those areas. And I really wanted to expose that to people, because if you're in this space, in the online space, and you're Googling, how to start a podcast, what you need to do, most of the advice is very much geared towards extroverts. And that makes sense, because those are strategies that have worked and they're quantifiable, right? You can put numbers behind them. But introverts have a different way of approaching things, and we just need to be okay with doing it differently and finding our own success with it. So that's why I really wanted to expose people to that.
Yeah, well said. And that's what an online summit like that does, because I believe that we can best learn from other introverts. I'm not saying we can't learn from extroverts, but if you want to learn how to be a public speaker, for example, learn from an introvert that's learned to be a great public speaker.
Absolutely. Yeah. Walk the same path. It helps when you can relate to that person one-to-one. For me, an extrovert is just too far removed from my personality type to be able to be like, okay, I can do what they do. It's very difficult.
And, this fits in with this conversation today. So probably when I was in college, I picked up a book, How to Overcome Shyness.
Okay.
And it didn't help at all. And now that I know things, and I've studied this so long for so many years now, if I was to go find that book again, I bet you it was written by an extrovert that didn't relate to any of my introvertedness and so if you want to overcome shyness or social anxiety, you're not going to learn that from an extrovert. You're going to best learn that from a fellow introvert. That's what I think.
Absolutely. We have such a different, unique perspective.
Yeah. And I mean, my first book was on time management, because when I was starting to blog about introversion and I was very busy, when I was getting to know myself as an introvert, I had a full-time job. I ran a business with my wife. I have 3 kids, and it was crazy. And I was studying time management at the same time. And I'm like, I have these needs as an introvert, and these books are not calling it out.
Interesting.
But there's certain things that I need to fit into my time management strategy. So that's why it's so important to have summits or have these conversations where, You know what? You
Yeah.
can be amazing at public speaking or leadership, whatever it is you want to do, but learn to do it in your best introverted way.
Yeah. And if you need help and support, there's a huge community out there that's just waiting to help you. I think we're very helpful. And, if you want to reach out to any of us, I think you're going to get what you're looking for.
And I get amazed all the time how large the community is and that it's still growing.
Yes.
It blows my mind, and it's such a good thing. There's so many people like yourself that are doing such great work, and it's awesome to see that. I was listening to something earlier, and a lot of times we hear a lot about extroverts, but it's because, like we said earlier, they're talking all the time, and so they're saying, this is how it should be. But we just need to give a louder voice that, what, we need to embrace our strengths, whoever it is that we are.
Yeah, and I think the conversation is starting to lean that way more also culturally, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have talked about a lot of things, introversion, social anxiety. Is there anything that we didn't talk about yet that you want to hit on?
I would just reiterate the fact that it's a process to accept your introversion. If you haven't, it's okay. I think a lot of us reach a point where, there's a before and an after. And once you're in the after, it's really beautiful that you can finally step into your power and find fulfillment the way that you are. And you stop seeking acceptance and external validation. But it's a process. And I just want to make sure that people know that it's not a one day to the next thing that happens.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And we just need to get going on that process. Yeah. Embrace who you are, and also just be confident. And that social anxiety can definitely be managed.
It can, yes, with effort. It's not wishing it away, unfortunately. It's with actual effort and stepping out and doing things that you don't want to do. That's the fastest way to manage your social anxiety.
Absolutely. So, Roxana, again, I could talk to you all day about this, but where can people find out more about the work that you do with introversion and social anxiety?
Yeah, so Honest Rocks is really all about social anxiety. So I have my website, my Instagram, my YouTube is catered to that. I'm revamping the whole system, my whole brand strategy, my website, everything's going to be brand new in the next couple months. And I'm excited about the new programs that I'm working on. And then I have Grow Introvert Grow, which is an online website where I send out like a bi-weekly community newsletter of all the things that are happening in the introvert community. So, like your podcast, it's going to be featured, any coach that is in the community. So whatever events are happening, I will be posting it there. So that's growintrovertgrow.com. So those are the two areas that I work on.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Keep up your great work. And again, thank you for being on today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the website quietandstrong.com. It includes blog posts, links to social media channels, and send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there is now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including your 4-letter Myers-Briggs code. You can also purchase the full report if you'd like more details. I'll add a link to the show notes. There's so many great things about being an introvert, and so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs, and be strong.